Hello and welcome to this video. This is a video where I react to how the media promotes transphobia, and the video is by Tom Nickolas. So let's go ahead and watch it.
This video was made possible by CuriosityStream and Nebula. In today's video...
By the way, Gremlin, fuck you. You were so close. Why the fuck did you open your mouth? Like, you made good shows. Okay, the IT crowd did have one episode where it was very homophobic, but, mostly good episodes of your shows. Some of your... Actually, you know what? No, one of your more recent shows is pretty shit. But, the point is, Father Ted, the IT crowd, they were pretty good shows, But no, you had to feck it up and open your fucking transphobic mouth. Anyway.
We're going to examine how trans rights, and trans people more broadly, are discussed in the media. In particular, we're going to explore how an increasing obsession with the so-called trans debate, even in news outlets which describe themselves as liberal or...
Okay, I think that's really the aim, because you're gonna have some fascists, Nazis all the time. So, basically, yeah, it's more specifically that these far-right outlets are watched by a lot of people.
Or progressive has created a cultural environment in which deeply dehumanizing has created a cultural environment.
I mean, like...
in which deeply dehumanizing arguments can be framed as entirely reasonable, sensible contributions to a respectable discussion.
Noun. Yeah. You might want to see through the ages different dictionary definitions and from different countries, because you'll soon find you can make a lot of arguments out of those. Not always good ones.
Doing so is naturally going to involve looking at a bunch of examples of people making transphobic arguments. So if that doesn't sound like something you need in your life right now, feel free to give this one a miss.
I won't.
Which, on the theme of things I wish I could give a miss, I'm afraid we need to start at the extremes, by talking for slightly longer than I would like about transphobic provocateur and Daily Wire host, Matt Walsh.
I mean, like, Matt is a bit stupid, like, so, it is possible he actually believes what he says, because he's thick.
On the 1st of June 2022, the conservative news site turned media company The Daily Wire released an original documentary called What is a Woman? Directed by Justin Folk and presented by Matt Walsh, the promo for the film suggested that it would be an inquisitive attempt by a controversial yet committed truth seeker to gain some clarity around contemporary attitudes towards sex and gender, with a particular focus on gender transition.
What are you doing here?
I'm asking these questions.
Okay.
I'm trying to figure out what a woman is. That's why I'm here. And this is the Women's March. I figured this is a good place to find out. I've come all this way to ask that question. Can anyone tell me what a woman is?
You are not here for women. We ask you to leave.
What is that?
What? What are you doing, Matt?
How am I harassing? I'm asking a question.
I don't know, Matt. Maybe, because that's part of harassment, you little piece of shit. Yeah, there's very, 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 Have you ever heard of verbal harassment? Slurs, for example. That would be the equivalent of someone, starting to hit you over the head with a shoe and like, what, is this harassment? No. Why do you think, Matt? Because it's physical. You're physically beating, That's what you're doing there? You're verbally harassing them? Jesus Christ, this fucker can't even understand basic harassment definitions. Which is concerning, just saying.
As anyone with even the slightest knowledge of Matt Walsh, or any of the other weird little dudes at the Daily Wire will have come to expect, however, this is nonsense. In reality, the film is little more than a 90-minute diatribe against trans people.
Yeah.
The film can broadly be divided into 3 kind of acts.
Also,
The
it's very
first-
weird for a very right-wing media outlet to be like, yeah, let's focus on the transphobia when it comes to women who they also discriminate against. Like, what? Also, once again, this is just a side issue. I don't get why people like Ben, who claim to be libertarians, can be anti-abortion. Because then you're not a libertarian, you're just picking and choosing, making you not a libertarian,
First, which we'll talk about in more detail later, does broadly cling to the pretense of Walsh being a well-intentioned documentarian.
Well,
I'm a husband. I'm a father of 4.
oh,
I host a talk show. I give speeches. I write books.
okay. First of all, yeah. So, your father, before you give speeches, you're what?
I like to make sense of things.
As we'll see later,
So is he saying, like how are they at all connected to? I like make sense of things. That's what I like to do. Make sense of things and just attack random minorities. Yeah, it's real fun for me. That's what I like to do. It's like, yeah. This is Matt Walt.
Walsh certainly asks some probing questions of his subjects, but the first 20 minutes of the documentary are spent mostly interviewing healthcare professionals and one academic who are either trans themselves or trans affirming in their practices.
What do you mean by assigned female? Who assigns?
First of all, Matt, you look like you're kind of drunk. It's concerning. Also,
Female.
Yeah.
I don't know, Matt. And this is just a little thing. You know the way when when you are you, and when you have a little bit of a pain, and you go, oh, I have a pain. Someone doesn't tell you have a pain. You tell them. Do you understand? That might be who it assigns. Then your actual gender. That'd be you be saying the actual gender, and the assigned would be the people who would be telling you, oh, you have a pain. That would be the assigned. Assigned meaning it's not accurate. Meaning like someone is telling you have a pain, you go, I don't have a pain. I don't. That's a fact. Now, you do you understand? So that's just getting across there. That's basically it. You are the correct, because obviously you're saying you have a pain, and the person saying you don't have a pain or you do have a pain is the person who's assigning that onto you.
I say mostly interviewing trans-affirming professionals because perhaps to reassure the Daily Wire's core audience that the documentary's not going to be too even-handed, they also managed to squeeze in a chat with this guy, whose qualifications to appear in a documentary about trans rights and healthcare amount to him running a Star Wars shop.
I mean, I guess Star Wars does take a look at political things, although I don't think really trans issues are necessarily political. They're just brought into the political sphere by fascists.
And also, I guess, this.
Because I got a dick.
Even if one is charitable enough to take the more
Okay, well, but what? No, no. That doesn't make much sense, to be honest. That's kind of the argument someone would make if we're like, oh, these group of people have teeth. These other group of people don't have teeth. So I must be part of this group because I have teeth. No, because you see, teeth aren't. They aren't separate from each group. You know, it's like a Venn diagram. You have teeth and are part of that group. You know, it just so happens that everybody else or everybody you appear, like most people, don't. You know what I mean? Or most people do. You know, so it's it's not a great argument.
Reasonable seeming sections in this first act at face value, however, by the second section of the film, the pretense of reasonable, disinterested inquiry has been dropped entirely. Over the course of the next 50 minutes, we're introduced to an ever-expanding cast of anti-trans activists and conspiracy theorists. Now, with some of these interviewees, you can at least see how they've developed the views they hold. This guy, Scott Nugent, for example, clearly had a very bad experience with transition.
I'm a biological woman that medically transitioned to appear like a male. I will never be a man.
And while he talks a lot of dangerous nonsense in this interview, freely misinterpreting research and citing some completely made up statistics, there's obviously some real hurt that's led to Nugent being sat in that chair opposite Matt Walsh. Most of the interviewees, however, are serial right-wing grifters, for whom the current anti-trans moral panic is just the latest focal point in a long-standing traditionalist agenda. Take this woman, Miriam Grossman.
I do think you do have to be careful if you're someone who's very right-wing, journeying to becoming like a fascist. Do be aware, just because they're palling with you now when you're attacking the minorities, you're next. Or maybe if you're not next, you will be there soon. And when your head is on the chopping block, maybe you'll think, maybe you shouldn't have, given them weight when they were attacking other people. Even if you believe that those people should be attacked, just maybe have a bit of common interest and just maybe don't help out, so they can go, well, that's that group attacked, boom, that's them dealt with, boom, there we are. Now on to you. Bring them to the torture chambers. Whoa, let's get this one going now. Whoa, just in a few more years and we'll have an absolute fascist government. Whoa, here we are. That you're next, or if you're not careful, a fascist government will get in power, and then boom, you'll just be in one go.
For instance, where other medical professionals interviewed during the film are portrayed as completely unhinged cranks, Grossman is offered up as one of the good ones, unspoiled by so-called gender ideology, which is unsurprising given that prior to boarding the right-wing disinformation gravy train a decade ago, Grossman seems to have spent most of her medical career as an in-house college psychiatrist, rather than having any kind of specialism in trans healthcare. The most revealing of the several segments which feature Grossman...
Teacher, basically. Yeah. Fortunately, teachers tend to think that they are able to do every job. They can't. Well, I mean, some can, but that's the minority, and most teachers cannot. I had a teacher once who thought that they could do a lot of stuff, and thought they could be a little detective as well. They were like, one time, they were like talking to a student. They were like, "Oh, you did this," and she's like, "No, that student didn't do that. Actually, you're wrong." But of course, you couldn't say that to them because they get angry. The point I'm making is that, when you live in a society where you surround yourself with people who won't tell you that you're wrong, down to fear, it becomes a problem.
Grossman comes about 50 minutes into the documentary when Grossman is asked to talk about schools. The particular idea that the film is trying to plant in our heads at this point is that schools are somehow encouraging children who would otherwise be completely content with the gender that they were assigned at birth to falsely come out as trans. As evidence for this, Grossman holds up a book called It's Perfectly Normal.
Okay? It's perfectly
Okay.
normal.
So yeah, I actually don't really like the cover design. You know, the name is relatively okay, I guess. Like, you know, you puberty and everything, but you know, the design is just, I don't really like the design of the stuff. You know, it just seems a bit. I don't. Anyway, the point is, you know, basically, yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, but yeah.
It's perfectly normal for 10 years and up.
Yeah, that. Do you not know when people learn about puberty? We were getting like a major talk about it, and what was it, when I was like 10 or 11? Actually, yeah, 11. I would have been 11. Some of the kids there would have been 10. Yeah, yeah, that was like, you know, kind of ordinary. You know, that's kind of when you learn about puberty, because that's when it like kind of tends to begin for most people. But you know, it's like, yeah, I mean, like, well, you know, that's when the typical thing begins. I mean, not for most people. That's when the typical range begins. But you know, it's like that's when it begins. It's like,
In order to highlight its age recommendation, she's even drawn arrows pointing to the box on the cover as though it's secret and not printed in
Circle.
eye-catching red. Within the context of everything we've been hearing about in the film so far, one would assume that this book is some kind of instruction manual, teaching kids how to become trans. Yet, that's not what It Perfectly Normal is at all. This book is actually a pretty broad primer on puberty, sex, and relationships. The copy of the book that Grossman shows to Walsh was published way back in 1994.
Jesus.
That's a full 28 years and almost my entire lifetime ago.
yeah.
Do you want to guess how many references to trans people there are in this book? If you guessed only one, you would be incorrect because it's 0.
Yeah.
An updated version of the book published in 2014 did amend this, but even then, whilst it's quite a nice affirmational little section, it only amounts to 12 fairly short sentences which do little more than explain that trans people exist. It only promotes becoming trans to the extent that this encyclopedia of South American birds promotes becoming a horned screamer. Side note, cracking cover design job on that book, by the way. That's proper
That is actually better than the
top stuff. Always judge a book by its cover. While most of what is a woman's anger is reserved for trans people, then there are also plenty of moments when these broader right-wing resentments slip out. Grossman, for example, turns out not only to be against acknowledgements of trans and queer people in schools, but in favour of abolishing sex and relationships education entirely.
What? Okay, that's okay. That's.
I also need to give a shout out to this guy, the incredibly named Carl Truman, who gives us this gem.
We need to acknowledge that there are powerful lobby groups, powerful cultural and political lobby groups driving this thing.
Okay. If you're gonna mention Hollywood, first of all, probably best if you're like, you know, not English.
Hollywood is pressing LGBTQ plus matters in so many movies.
Really, is it? Because it seems like Hollywood is more pressed on promoting capitalism than it is LGBTQ plus matters, which what the fuck does that mean? Matters, like, did you pronounce it incorrectly, and did you mean like it matters to include people, or like what is meant by matters for one? Anyway,
we're seeing it in the way Amazon sets up its algorithms.
What the fuck?
You heard it here first, folks. The Amazon algorithm is
Amazon sets up its algorithms for you to buy more shit, man. Now, if that means it's showing you more, inclusive books, that might be, because they think you'll buy some stuff because you'll be like, see, this product was on Amazon's front page. It's like, buddy, that's your personal recommendations. I know they're not always great, but that might just be an indication about you. I'm just saying, if Amazon is recommending these things to you, it is your personal recommendations. Amazon doesn't go like, yeah, let's take a cut in the profits by promoting things. No, they're just like, no, how about we don't be homophobic in order to reduce profits, Like, if you've got a company where you ban the sale of wedding cakes to gay couples, you're going to have reduced sales then, you idiot. That's how it works. Because they're customers. Now, of course, you could argue maybe you'll make the sales back in bigoted little SHITs who will come to your shop because you're a little homophobe. But of course, that is an argument, and technically you could argue possibly it's true. But when you're a megacorp, that doesn't really work because people aren't going to be coming to you. They're already there. So really, you can only lose customers. You kind of reach the maximum customers you can. All you can do is encourage those customers to buy more. And, well, banning items is, not always a great idea, which is why a lot of goods on Amazon are scams.
Okay now. Joking aside, by the third act of the film, What is a Woman has become driven entirely by unhinged conspiracism. There's also a stylistic shift, in which we leave behind the talking head format which has dominated the film thus far, and are invited to follow Walsh as he undertakes a series of stunts intended to expose the absurdity of so-called gender ideology.
I'm done asking questions.
One of these stunts sees Walsh write a children's book called Johnny the Walrus, about a young boy who, wait for it, identifies as a walrus.
Johnny's a boy with a big imagination.
Oh my god.
One day he's a dog, the next day a crustacean. Johnny's mom loves her son's make-believe time.
Jeez.
You're Johnny the Walrus till you change your mind.
This is obviously a super original gag, and not just a lazy cross between I sexually identify as an attack helicopter and that 2018 episode of Last Week Tonight, in which John Oliver released a satirical children's book about Mike Pence's bunny rabbit. The more visceral third act stunt, however, is that in which Walsh attends a school board meeting in Loudoun County, Virginia. The background here is that Loudoun County School Board was looking to pass a set of policies which would, among other things, require teachers to use students' correct pronouns and affirm trans students' right to use the bathrooms which correspond with their gender. In truth, this was simply a formalization of already common practices in...
Like in my school, there's no difference between the bathrooms. Except, of course, the bathrooms in the male toilets are broken and covered in urine. That's the only difference, really. That was the only difference, really. It was just... They were just covered in urine, and it's just...
in local schools. Yet, right-wingers descended on the county in an attempt to turn it into a cause célèbre. As the film tells it, Walsh travels over from his home in Nashville to join the raucous. Yet, when he gets there, he finds that the school board has introduced rules requiring anyone who wants to attend a meeting to prove that they're a resident of the county. Which, obviously.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, Walsh finds a solution.
That's right. Conservative commentator Matt Walsh told me he's leasing out someone's basement in Loudoun County so he'll be able to speak during tonight's meeting.
Which, I will say, there's an amazing lack of self-awareness to a guy as generally creepy as Matt Walsh, going to such great lengths to gain access to a school building, including hiring out a basement, which is objectively the creepiest of all residential.
Like for a rich fella goes, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna hire out a basement. Like, okay. Yeah, the police have gotta raid that basement after you go, because, or even just while you're there, because if I was, he's probably gonna do something there. We gotta make sure we check that place out, because when someone who's fairly wealthy gets a basement, it's like just a basement, like not gets a house with a basement or an apartment which has access to the basement of the apartment block. No, they just get the basement. It's like, that's concerning, because you have the money to go more, but you didn't. So you only need a basement? Why do you only need a basement?
Dwellings, and then for him to accuse others of having ill intentions for children. The sequence ends with Walsh giving his speech to the school board meeting. The address is the cruel, hate-filled screed of a religious fundamentalist. It involves accusing school administrators of being child abusers, a cult, fanatics, for the simple act of trying to create a safe learning environment for some of their most vulnerable students. These 60 seconds are really the truth of the film. All that pretense at genuine inquiry and the attempts at comedy are stripped away. And what we're left with is an insecure grifter using children as a prop to push a cruel, transphobic agenda. Of course, as I mentioned at the beginning, this was always going to be the case. The Daily Wire was never going to have produced an even-handed, informative documentary about gender and gender transition. But despite the fact that this section ended up being long, this is not really a video about the Daily Wire or Matt Walsh or what is a woman. See, what kept jumping out to me as I watched this film was how familiar the tone of those early sections in which Walsh interviews trans-affirming professionals felt. And not to the work of other extreme right-wing provocateurs, but to the manner in which many supposedly respectable mainstream news outlets, particularly in the UK, have increasingly begun to frame discussions of trans people and their rights in recent years.
But before we go any further, I want to suggest that if you're finding this video interesting, then you might also like to check out another video that I made about the media, which looks at how bad actors on the political right use organisations called think tanks to push certain stories and perspectives in the news. And if you want the best experience for watching that video, then you're going to want to do so on my streaming service, Nebula. Nebula was founded by a bunch of educational and education-adjacent creators who wanted to be less beholden to algorithms and demonetization systems when making videos. Unlike YouTube or TikTok or Instagram, Nebula is owned by the creators who publish on it. This ensures we have more say in how the platform is run and allows us to create bigger and bolder videos for our lovely viewers. That's you. And also to present them in a premium ad-free viewing experience. One in which, if you follow a creator, you'll actually get a notification when they put out a new video. Once you're finished watching my video about think tanks, for example, you're probably going to want to stick around and watch Second Thoughts videos about media bias, as well as Mia Mulder's video about trans women in sport. Now, if the idea of early and exclusive content from all your favourite creators sounds intriguing, then you're going to want to know that the best way to sign up to Nebula is through a deal that we've put together with the folks over at CuriosityStream. This allows you to get access to both platforms for less than it would cost to sign up to either on its own. Where Nebula is the preferred platform of all your favourite indie creators, CuriosityStream gathers together thousands of titles of big-budget documentaries from more traditional studios. I recently really enjoyed the 3-part series Electing Lincoln, which contains a fascinating episode about the shamelessness with which 19th century American newspaper owners would distort the truth to fit their personal political agendas. I'll leave you to draw your own conclusions as to how much has changed there. But whether your thing is history, nature, science, or travel, CuriosityStream is bound to have loads of titles that you will absolutely adore. CuriosityStream and Nebula make for amazing companions to one another, as we've teamed up to put together an incredibly priced bundle deal. If you head to curiositystream.com/Tom Nickolas, you can get access to both CuriosityStream and Nebula for an entire year for less than $15. Further, in doing so and in using that link,
it's probably better to use the monthly price, because that's what's in people's heads for streaming services such as Netflix, which by the way doesn't pay its creators, Amazon, which doesn't pay its employees, and for its smaller creators, it doesn't pay them at all. It just pays them like a little bit of money for views. Like I play on like time. I made a semi like short film. I was thinking about publishing it on Amazon. I didn't in the end, but it got. But I was looking at it, I was like, do we want? We aren't paying much. Like it was like a small amount. So yeah, most streaming services don't pay that much, but they all tend to use a monthly thing because it seems better to have a smaller number. So I would recommend, using the more monthly figure. But maybe you don't want to, be that way of just tricking consumers.
Helping to support my channel and helping me to make more videos like this one, which will resume momentarily.
Hello.
So I guess I need to start by sharing a shocking revelation with you. Britain has a transphobia problem. Okay,
it does, yeah.
Unfortunately, to many people, that's probably not particularly new information, as the deluge of Turf Island memes one is met with whenever one mentions the UK in certain spaces online might suggest. For several years now, Britain's descent into a full-blown transphobic moral panic has been impossible to ignore. For folks living in the UK, and particularly trans folks living in the UK, it's quite clear that a low hum of transphobic sentiment has become as central to British culture as queuing, fish and chip shops, and laundering the wealth of Russian oligarchs.
Well, this is the funny thing. I remember I watched a show before that was made before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and you just got the Russian oligarch. And I was just thinking, the Russian oligarch wants to buy a bunch of apartments. I wonder why.
But the phenomenon has also gained plenty of international attention. American news outlets, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, and CNN, have all commissioned British writers to try and make sense of this curious phenomenon for the benefit of perplexed readers outside of the country. And at the political level, the Council of Europe, which monitors human rights abuses and administers the European Convention on Human Rights, issued a formal condemnation of the UK government for backsliding on protections for trans.
I mean, like, if you are on a list with Poland when it comes to, like, close to fascism, Poland and Russia, you have got to be concerned because you are going to Nazism if you're not careful.
Trans people. How and why the UK arrived at this point is a complicated, multi-factored story which would require an entire video all to itself. What's evident, however, is that the rise of UK transphobia has been an acutely top-down affair. Over in the US, the stereotypical transphobe is most likely to be a MAGA hat-wearing, small-town-dwelling, fundamentalist Christian. By contrast, the leaders of
Britain... They're also generally homophobic. If they're male, generally, not necessarily openly, but maybe a little bit sexist underneath, like misogynist. And also, if they're white, they're probably racist too. It's not great.
Britain's anti-trans crusade have been secular, wealthy, educated.
That fucking guy. Disappointment. Like, Jesus Christ. He's like fucking, like, God Almighty. Like, why?
Metropolitans. Furthermore, where in other countries the fueling of bigoted sentiment is usually the preserve of arguably fringe right-wing outlets such as the Daily Wire or Breitbart, in the UK, a suspicion towards trans people has come to guide the reporting of media institutions across the political spectrum.
Yeah.
In fact, among the publications that have been most influential in rallying opposition to trans rights in Britain have been The Guardian and The New Statesman. These are periodicals which are thought of within British culture as being progressive to the point of parody. Yet both have seemingly adopted opposition to trans rights as
The New Statesman, like, let's not be going that far now. I wouldn't call The New Statesman in particularly,
a central plank of their editorial line. The relationship between this British form of polite, liberal transphobia and the more obviously cruel, conservative transphobia typified by What Is a Woman is complicated. In July 2022, the accidental queen of the UK movement, J.K. Rowling, had a brief interaction with Matt Walsh on Twitter. Rowling criticised Walsh's self-aggrandising approach, only to then praise What Is a Woman as doing a good job exploding.
Oh my god, this fucking idiot, like. Why? Also, what do you mean? Coward? What the? What? Anyway, all I'm gonna say is, once again, do be aware, you will be next if you're not careful. The chopping block will come on your neck. Just saying. Just because the right-wingers agree with you with your transphobia doesn't mean they won't push you into that lava when the time comes and they've finished with the people you hate. Just saying, just making you aware.
Loading the incoherence of gender identity theory and some of the harms it's done. Julie Bindel, a journalist who has been a key figure in popularising trans-exclusionary radical feminism in Britain over the past 2 decades, similarly claimed that, whilst the film had loads of sexism in it, it was still well worth a watch. For context, this is a film for which well worth a watch.
Thank God you said but, that was 3 letters away from just being,
For context, this is a film for which this is the final scene.
What is a woman?
Jesus.
An adult human female.
Matt,
Who needs help opening this?
Still, well worth a watch for all good feminists, I guess.
Like, that also... Fucking Christ, like... Oh, God.
Nevertheless, Rowling and Bindel are somewhat...
That's like out of a horror show. God almighty, Matt.
In that both have been entirely consumed by transphobia, to the point that it's become their whole brand.
You'll tell me, won't you? You'll tell me what I want to know, or else pain and suffering. Be aware about when you make something. I guess the benefit of making something that's horror is that you can just say, well, that was the intention. With this, you really can't. You really can't, because it kind of goes against your point.
And I guess you've got to pivot to something when no one wants to watch your films anymore. Given the prominence afforded to What Is a Woman by the wild amounts of money that the Daily Wire spent promoting the film, including more than $1 million in ad spend on Facebook alone, it was probably impossible for liberals that have gone all in.
Yeah, in fairness, like Facebook, I don't know how expensive it is to buy ads on Facebook, but like, it's probably a good place, because on YouTube you'll get people you might be accidentally advertising people who aren't going to be, fans of you, and because that's obviously that's going to be a bit wasteful. But on Facebook, yeah, you're going to get mostly transphobes.
In on transphobic moral panic to avoid some kind of alliance of convenience with Walsh and his fan base. Elsewhere in the British media, most journalists would be infuriated if you suggested that the reporting that they do at the BBC or Sky News or...
Sky News. No, fuck that. Sky News is not a reliable source. Rupert, infects everything he touches.
Wales Online or wherever else had anything in common with the openly hateful, opportunistic bigotry of Matt Walsh and the Daily Wire.
I think, though, the point with the Daily Wire is that it's very similar to a lot of very right-wing media in America, where you're like, do they actually believe what they're saying? Because at times you get like a little look under the hood, and it really seems like they do not believe what they're saying, except that they know there's a whole fuck ton of money in saying that. A lot of money. We're talking billions coming from, funders, millions upon millions from like actual viewers, loads of stuff, like in England, most far-right media outlets need to be somewhat supported. They're beginning they're beginning, like most major mainstream media outlets need to be like funded by someone. They don't really have enough like adverts and that type of thing, money coming from just direct viewers. But in America, you don't really need to. Like Fox News makes a fuck ton of money off its viewer base, like it doesn't really need investment. It like, and that's the thing. There's a lot of money made out of bigotry, like.
In fact, in 2019, the Independent Press Standards Organisation published this report, which sought to analyse changing trends in how British newspapers had reported on trans issues in the years between 2009 and 2019. And pretty much all of the editors and other newspaper staff interviewed for the study were adamant that journalists have adopted a more respectful approach to stories concerning transgender subjects than at the start of the decade. Now, there is one very small...
I think it's probably worse, to be honest.
...way in which this is true. As that same report highlighted, over the past decade, there has been a significant drop-off in the use of outright slurs in trans-adjacent newspaper articles.
How did I know?
In 2009 and 2010, around 10% of articles about trans people published in the British media used language which the study very generously describes as being considered offensive. By 2019, that figure was down to just 1%. Which...
Yeah, I mean, most newspapers don't go. Who recently, announced a new package. No, most people aren't called slurs, within the article, because, they know you can leave that up to the readers to say,
Well done, British media. You did it. You solved transphobia. Okay, obviously not. Don't get me wrong, a decrease in outright slurs is clearly good, but that alone doesn't mean that the reporting that you're doing is necessarily respectful or balanced or even accurate.
Yeah, well, that's...
All of which brings us to this clip. A British politician and current leader of the UK Labour Party, Keir Starmer, being interviewed by the BBC's Andrew Marr.
No, I won't go that far, but not a nice man, Also, once again, I'm going to say this for the end of the world until that fecker is kicked out of his party. How can you have a knighthood and also be leader of the Labour Party? You can't. Please, Keir, just resign.
Now, those of you watching from outside the UK probably don't spend a massive portion of your time thinking about the UK Labour Party.
I do. I do. He's just good, but like it's no. Starmer is not good. He's moved the party more right wing, or rather, he is an example of the party moving more right wing because they kicked out Jeremy Corbyn and his supporters. So,
and I envy.
Actually, I was looking. I got a comment before, from someone who was like, "Oh, Liz Truss paled in comparison to to Jeremy Corbyn." You're like, yeah, but the thing is, Jeremy Corbyn is not on power. So what the fuck are you talking about? For one, and for another, also, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, Liz Truss is like, yeah, we're gonna slash taxes for the rich, and then for you people, yeah, I guess we can slash for your taxes. Let's say the green levy, so that should push the climate goals away for a good bit. So now we can all, the Supreme Court rolls back decisions on the EPA, and the Prime Minister in England takes over the green levy. How amazing is that? Yay! One of the biggest producers of fossil fuels, and they fucking roll back their environmental requirements. Jesus. Anyway, my point is basically, just Labour's basically like a centrist party now at this point.
Really, I do. But
Yeah.
Starmer is essentially the platonic ideal of the wannabe sensible centrist. He's super reluctant to make any policy pledges and is highly conflict averse in interviews. He essentially makes Joe Biden look like a peppy, charismatic radical. Some of this timidity...
Not that far, I wouldn't say. Like, Biden's right wing. Just is. Keir Starmer's like centrist, right, like centrist to the right.
Was on display in his chat with Andrew Marr. The exchange was recorded in September 2021 in Brighton, where the Labour Party were holding their annual conference. This was Starmer's first such event as party leader, and against a backdrop of the COVID-19 pandemic, a government corruption scandal, and plenty of internal party divisions at the conference itself, the question which Marr was desperate for Starmer to answer was this.
Is it transphobic to say only women have a cervix?
Once more, for those at the back.
Is it transphobic to say only women have a cervix?
Okay, so there is some context.
It's not necessarily transphobic. It's just wrong. Just kind of wrong. Just sort of kind of wrong. Just factually. Like even by your own definitions, like even if you're transphobe, even your own definitions would make that wrong. Like even if you are a transphobic person, the answer to that is not necessarily yes, but it's wrong. It will be an incorrect statement, it would be like saying, is it racist to say all Irish people are drunk all the time? It's like, well, all Irish people aren't drunk all the time, so it's not necessarily racist, but it's an incorrect statement. So even if you're not saying, oh well, that's not necessarily offensive. It's like, oh well, even if it's not necessarily an offensive thing to say, it is wrong. So just don't say it. Like
text here relating to Labour MP Rosie Duffield, who over the past year has been performing a kind of low-rent J.K. Rowling tribute act of making increasingly transphobic comments.
Knowing, you don't know, you're wrong. So you think, and you're wrong. Knowing it would be an incorrect statement. You think you know. I fucking hate it when books do this, and then people, you're like, I know. No, you think you know. You can never say you know, because you're the one saying it. Like...
and then playing the victim whenever people disagreed with her. More interesting than what led to this question being asked, the victim when...
General critical beliefs. protected spaces. Protected how exactly? Just gotta throw that in there. You know, I know it's depressing, but there are very few protected spaces that you can't use like full on like violence to protect. Like I mean like armed people. Be like, no, you're not allowed to enter here. Or we'll shoot you. You know, it's very hard to say you have protected spaces. What protected spaces?
Whenever people disagreed with her. More interesting than what led to this question being asked, however, is what happens next. See, Starmer's answer wasn't awful.
Well, it is something that shouldn't be said. It is not right.
But it was...
It's not correct, I think you mean. It's wrong. It would be an incorrect statement. So it's just... It's a stupid thing to say because it's not true. So...
Kinda awkward. You can almost hear the fans speeding up in his brain as he tries to compute an answer which will please as many people as possible.
It is something that shouldn't be said. It is not right.
But while it might not make for great politics, politicians squirming like this does make for good television. Starmer's awkward non-answer signalled to the media that trans issues were a topic which could be used to catch Labour politicians off guard. When Starmer's colleague and essentially second in command, Rachel Reeves, appeared on radio station LBC the next day, right-wing host Nick Ferrari thus decided to ask her the same question.
But I have to put it to you, the same question that was put to the party leader. Is it transphobic to say only women have a cervix? Good morning.
Which nothing says British journalist in the early 2020s more than asking someone about cervixes before you've even said good morning.
Good morning.
Reeves's answer also started well.
I just think that this issue has just become so divisive and toxic.
I mean, that's like saying... Is it offensive to suggest that Nazis shouldn't be allowed to murder people in their death camps?
I just think that this issue has become so toxic. People coming out saying, "Oh, no, it is wrong for Nazis to murder people in their death camps." That's not really a divisive, toxic issue. That's just Nazis not being happy when you say no, and then saying they'll vote for you if you just don't say no. If you don't say no, they'll vote for you. Oh, all you have to do is just don't say yes, and then if you don't say that, it's like, yeah, but this is where it leads.
And it pits people against each other, both groups who face discrimination in society, women and trans women. And I just find this debate incredibly unhelpful and unproductive, to be totally honest.
Ah, good on Rachel. That's a pretty cracking answer, actually. Like, proper decisive. You really nips that one in the bud. But then, when pushed further...
Look, is it transphobic? Look,
I think she's realising there are a lot of transphobic people who want to vote Labour, and they won't fucking vote for you. But how I would say is, fuck them. Yeah, they're not going to vote Conservative unless they're completely fucking stupid. So you just deal with the Liberal Democrats. That's pretty much the only party they can go for. You say the Liberal Democrats, well, if you get enough votes, we'll go into government with you. And boom, you get into government. Sure, you may not have a majority, but no, you should government. Yeah, I'm just saying, Yeah, it's just...
Look, I don't even know how to start answering these questions.
It's very simple. It is transphobic. It's also stupid and wrong. Because it's not just offensive, it's stupid. It's a basic question. If you think that if you're asking a question, is it transphobic? You're kind of implying, oh, is it an offensive term? No, it's not an offensive. It's just wrong. It's an incorrect. It's just an incorrect statement. You know?
Oh dear. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. God, it was going so well, Rachel. From here on out, over the next 6 months, there was a 50-50 chance that any appearance by a Labour politician on TV or the radio would, sooner or later, end in them being asked some question about gender and genitalia.
Is it transphobic to say only women have a cervix, David?
But trans women are women, from your perspective. Is that right?
Are you comfortable defining what a woman is?
So a woman can have a penis?
Do I think that women were born with penises? Yes. Do you agree with her?
Now, Labour Party politicians weren't the only ones being pressed to declare their interpretation of the meaning of womanhood. As we'll see towards the end of this video, in the period since, the Conservative Party has increased...
Don't you worry, the Conservatives can answer. They aren't flustering about it. They're just answering no to that question.
Increasingly sought to turn trans rights into a wedge issue. The reason that Labour MPs have had to field these questions so much more than politicians from other parties is that their responses have consistently been absolute car crashes. The mere mention of trans people seems to cause senior Labour Party figures to turn into whimpering little messes. These presenters all probably feel as though they're doing an excellent job here. And by the metrics that really matter in contemporary journalism, they are. These exchanges make for great social media content and tend to get a decent amount of clicks. Far more, at least, than videos of politicians talking about taxes or whatever else. But that aside, in these interviews, even the most right-wing of these presenters will no doubt comfort themselves that they've not sought to push an agenda at all here, but have merely been asking questions.
Well,
this facade of...
I mean, like, we're just asking questions. Like, it's a bit of a dodgy one, because the thing is, that's how verbal bullying works. I'm just asking a question, right? I'm just asking a question. What's all asking questions, right? I'm just asking questions. Can't answer the question. Answer the question. Hey, boy, answer the question. Answer the question. You know, it's like, that's verbal bullying and verbal harassment. So, yeah, I mean...
Just asking questions often allows journalists to convince themselves as much as their viewers that they are of a completely different breed to motivated conspiracists like Matt Walsh. They're not screaming in the faces of a school board accusing them of child abuse, but talking calmly and politely in the studio of a respected news organisation. And yet, Walsh spends a good hour of his film warming up to that big finale. For the entire opening third of What is a Woman, his approach is practically identical to that of these mainstream British news presenters. And this got me thinking, maybe there's an opportunity. Even if we acknowledge that there are some important differences between What is a Woman and these interviews in the British media, maybe the abundant similarities
I mean, I kind of have to say, it's kind of on the hands of the British media to be like, is it somewhat worse if it's like the same feeling behind? Like if someone is racist and they are just outright racist, they use slurs, they use this, they use that, or they're like more subtle and they try and convince their viewers to sort of turn into racist bigots like them, then it's like, well, that's almost worse, because at least the person who's saying slurs, you know, instantly they say a slur, you know, you can leave now. This person is, you know, fairly racist. It isn't like, oh, and these discussions here, by the way, these people are bad, you know, these people are that's in your head now, you know? Instead of that slow melting your brain into their ideology sort of wax, you know, allowing them to sort of model you. Instead, you just have an instant sort of thing. So that's the difference, I would say. Well, the original media is almost more damaging because it is more mainstream in a way. Like, I'm not going to listen to Matt Walsh unless I'm actually, like, critiquing it, you know. So that's the thing. I'm not going to watch that for news purposes. I'm not going to watch the Daily Wire with an uncritical eye. You know, when I say uncritical, I mean, like, well, you know, uncritical to an extent. You know, if ever I watch that stuff, I'm going to be making very sure I'm not trying to learn anything from it, you know? Because it's unreliable in very many ways.
Not to teach us.
Like, historically, it is terrible for historical information. I've looked at some stuff before, and my God, some of the stuff Daily Wire puts out is, Jesus Christ, you go, do these people even open a book, like, at all? Like, do they even have basic understanding? It's like, it's fucking crazy.
Really going on in these discussions about gender and trans rights in the UK press. Now, some of you might be thinking that it's a bit strange to have gotten this far through a video about journalists obsessing over the definition of the word woman without having provided some kind of answer to that question. Surely, by now, there should have been a section in which I crack the spine on some dusty old copy of the Oxford English Dictionary and take you through some etymology or something. Which, if I did, would reveal that the word derives from the Old English term wifman, or wife person, which seems a little bit problematic.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is, however, that none of the interviewers in any of the conversations we've looked...
Oh, just look at a diction. Oh, yeah. Meaning that everyone who isn't married wouldn't be. Okay, that's not a great argument. That's going to alienate a lot of your audience if you start going down that argument. Like, no, it's not just you there's a woman, it's also all the... Oh, fuck, you've all left. Fuck, yeah, I forgot. You kind of need to convince people who are in a minority or majority to watch you and then sort of scrape away at them so that they still watch you even as you're actively putting them down and, you know, making them second-class citizens. That happens, by the way. People who are in like groups that are attacked people, whether it's a minority or majority, they still watch stuff, but it's a slow thing. It isn't just like you turn it on. Yes, by the way, fuck you. Yeah, we all hate you on this news station. I know. Fuck you guys. Also, when we get our way, the politicians we support will absolutely destroy you. They'll take away everything you have, and you'll be left with nothing. Yeah. Anyway, continue watching. No one's gonna continue watching that. But sort of thing. That's probably why they wouldn't really explain the full word. Just you know, in that conversation there.
Looked at in this video are remotely interested in the definition of woman.
Yeah.
Let me explain. See, if you sit down to watch What is a Woman, you will very quickly notice that its style is pretty derivative. As I mentioned earlier, it outright pinches gags from John Oliver and also takes some cues from Michael Moore and from The Daily Show. The cultural reference that kept leaping into my mind as I was watching the film, however, was this guy.
My name is Borat. I like you.
As a reminder, in this first act of What is a Woman, Matt Walsh almost exclusively interviews healthcare professionals and one academic who are trans-affirming in their practices. If we take the film on face value, this is supposed to be Walsh giving supporters of trans rights an opportunity to explain their understanding of sex and gender. Throughout, however, it's evident that Walsh is playing something of a character. Of course, I don't doubt that Matt Walsh is a pretty intellectually incurious guy, but he's obviously hamming it up a bit. I mean, with a very slightly different framing, this could all be a very, very good parody of the exact genre of confused by modern life bloke that Matt Walsh is.
Being a dad is one of the great privileges of my life.
Like,
give my son a BB gun,
Jesus
and that's just about all the emotional support he needs.
Yeah, I also hate my kids. Maybe this is simply some good, old-fashioned, self-depreciating humour. Even a humorless loser like me occasionally enjoys a bit of self-ridicule. But the more I watched of What Is a Woman, the more it became evident that Matt Walsh, being a little bit intellectually challenged, is actually pretty essential for the film to work.
Yeah.
See, as we discussed earlier,
You
the
kind of
idea
get
that
be like,
Walsh is out on
well,
some
because yes, and I realized, of course, because of my mental capacity to understand like basic things, that that argument doesn't. Oh wait, no, I want to agree with that argument, so that doesn't really work if I use basic mental skills. Okay, so scratch that. Let's go again. So yeah, because of my clearly, definitely mental capacity, I can tell you that yeah, you must be right, because that's definitely what basic intelligence will tell you. Not
genuine fact-finding mission is a complete facade.
Okay, that's
the real premise of this first
don't look
portion
down
of
at
the
that.
film
It makes
is
it look like
the left is crazy and no one is able to say what a woman is anymore. The problem for Walsh and the production team is that many of his interviewees actually do provide fairly decent answers
So you're gonna have
to
to cut
the
them.
question. Take Marcy Bauer's response, for instance.
A woman is it's a combination of your physical attributes and then what you're showing to the world and the gender clues that you give. And hopefully those match your gender identity.
Now, not everyone will agree with this definition, but for the film to work, Walsh can't just disagree with the definition that someone provides. That definition needs to be absolutely nonsensical. Whenever he's given any answer to his question, which accepts that gender might be a tiny bit more complicated than just woman equals vagina, then Walsh has to act like a complete simpleton, as though his brain just can't compute anything beyond a very basic level of reasoning. The most ridiculous example
I mean,
of
it wouldn't really work though, because it's like, even if that were true, that would leave, a small portion as a percentage. For percentages are important, but still overall, still a large number of people. Kind of, a bit like, well, then what would my gender be then, Matt? Because doesn't exactly match everything you say. Just saying, it's important to understand, if everything doesn't match, maybe you're
this
wrong.
happens slightly later in the film, after Walsh asks gender studies professor Patrick Grzanka to help him understand the difference between sex and gender. This starts off normal enough.
What we tend to think about in the social sciences today is that sex refers to a set of biological characteristics and gender is a social construct or category.
But then a piece of classical music starts to fade in, and the film begins to skip parts of Grzanka's answer, as if to imply that it's really long and pretentious, which has the secondary effect of making it look like Walsh's brain just melts the instant that he hears a word longer than 2 syllables. You think you can explain things to me? Well, checkmate leftists, because I'm an idiot. At the end of the day, there is no
answer. It's an issue with calling people leftists, when it's just like, no, they're just not fascists like you, Matt. They're still on the right, they're just not fascists.
So that any of Walsh's trans-affirming interviewees could give that would suffice. Because, as with Borat, the goal here isn't to genuinely interrogate these interviewees' expertise, but to simply ask them question after question until they say something that sounds a bit silly. And that's before we even get into the fact that, like those in Borat, all of these interviews were secured under false pretenses.
Seriously?
There's more than an element of this.
That might be a crime, actually, because you're selling a documentary. Like, it might be, because you're not just gathering information, you're actually selling that information.
In the exchanges that we've been looking at from the British media, too. In one interview, we even see a repeat of this pantomime of acting as though any definition of womanhood which acknowledges that cervixes might not be everything is treated as though it's beyond the limits of human comprehension.
I think it's because a lot of people listening would say, well, I know what a woman is, it's really straightforward. And then it feels that politicians start to get themselves into rabbit holes about this.
The added awfulness here is that, where Walsh at least has the decency to play the idiot himself, the UK equivalent typically involves affluent, privately educated nepotism babies like Stig Abel here, suggesting that it's their audience who is too thick to understand what's going on. Way to pay back the fans, Stig. Crucially, even when politicians have leaned towards the kinds of trans-exclusionary response...
Well, at least they're honest, you know. Their audience, if you're, you know, fairly right-wing, generally made up of thick people. Now, there are some smart people. The interesting thing about, like, people right-wing is that you do have some people who are honestly right-wing for actually proper reasons, which is, it benefits them.
Is that it seems that these journalists are looking for, that hasn't been enough either. After being asked several times for her definition of woman, for example, Labour MP Annalise Dodds began to distance herself from support for trans rights. When asked if she agreed with a colleague that women could be born with penises, she gave this jumbled answer.
Well, no, I don't agree with her. Biological females obviously aren't. Of course, there are also trans women who've made a transition in their gender, but sex is not the same as gender.
Did this mealy-mouthed response put the matter to bed? No, of course not. The channel in question still clipped the interview for social media, and further headlines followed about the Labour Party being torn apart by the so-called trans debate. On one level then, the question, what is a woman, is simply being used as a means of securing a gotcha moment, in which, by pulling the right faces whilst their interviewee responds, a presenter can portray them as being either stupid, disingenuous, or out of touch. You can't get me with your big ideas about gender! For Matt Walsh, this is an attempt to discredit his political opponents. For British journalists, it is partly about trying to push the Labour Party to the right on social issues, but also about presenters wanting to generate some buzz about their respective shows on social media through taking advantage of the inherent virality of these clips. There is another, more important function that the question, what is a woman, serves in all these interviews, however. And that is the pseudo-philosophical veneer that such a focus on picking apart the meaning of words and concepts gives to the conversation. Suddenly, we're not just doing boring old politics anymore, we're doing metaphysics, baby! It just brings such a refined academic air to the proceedings. Matt Walsh really leans into this during the opening act of his film, and it leads to some incredible voiceover moments.
Truth is, I'm not very good at fiction. But what is truth? Is there a truth? Is this what progress looks like?
Jesus.
Can my boys really become girls?
No, not become. Can the people you think of as boys be girls?
Do I have 4 daughters? Do I now have to pay for 4 weddings?
Okay, fuck you then, Matt. Like,
is there a son trapped in my daughter's body? If so, how do I get him out?
oh God, almighty.
Are any of my kids who they claim to be? Who are these people? Who am I?
Seriously, it would be impossible to write a sketch satirising Matt Walsh because it would just be word for word this. A similar desire to want to feel like an intellectual no doubt also fuels presenters like Stig Abel and Nick Ferrari and Andrew Marr, all of whom get a chance to roleplay as Plato for 5 minutes. But the most important effect of this philosophical gesturing is the manner in which it allows everyone involved in these debates to pretend that this conversation is primarily about abstract ideas. We're just discussing definitions here, guys. When, in reality, that's far from the case. See, as is evident in the trajectory of Matt Walsh's documentary, the question, what is a woman, is really just a stand-in for, do you think trans people exist? Which is itself a stand-in for more practical questions about what rights should be extended to trans people, what healthcare they should have access to, and whether they should be able to live free from harassment. While the motivations may be slightly less clear, this is equally true of the interviews that we've been looking at from the British media. Journalists don't make a habit out of asking high-ranking politicians abstract philosophical questions for no reason. The motivation for doing so here then is because they believe that the definition of womanhood that these interviewees provide will be indicative of how they might vote on legislation relating to trans rights. The question, what is a woman, is thus a way to push politicians to commit to supporting or opposing trans rights without, you know, coming across as too divisive. Of course, there are elements of the British media that are more than happy to engage in very direct, open fear-mongering about trans people. However, that kind of journalism only really works among a certain crowd. More mainstream audiences will often be turned off by rhetoric which comes across as too outwardly hateful. The team which produced What is a Woman seems very aware of this. There's a reason that the first 25 minutes of the film seem so mild for something produced by the Daily Wire.
I mean,
it needs that time to set Walsh up as a reasonable, respectable journalist. To anyone who's only coming across his work for the first time, this functions to present the hate, which so clearly fuels his later stunts, as the outcome of the conversations these had during the making of this film, rather than a textbook case of right-wing fear of the other. This isn't to say that I necessarily think that any of these journalists are likely to be giving speeches at TERF rallies anytime soon, but it's clear that each of them and their producers feel some level of professional jealousy when they see the attention which inflammatory articles about the so-called trans debate attract. This pseudo-philosophical language thus provides an opportunity in the form of a level of plausible deniability. They're able to participate in this controversial debate, or sometimes not even mentioning trans people by name at all. Most British journalists would thus like to think that there is an ocean between themselves and Matt Walsh. Okay, obviously there is a literal ocean between them most of the time, but...
well, sometimes, you know... it's just, I just wonder sometimes about journalists, you know, sometimes it might just be a little bit of a direction from the top.
I mean a metaphorical one as well. Journalists such as those that we've looked at in this video would perhaps stress that their reporting lacks the kind of open hostility towards trans people that defines the output of institutions like the Daily Wire. Yeah,
that's not
just as that more timid opening act of What is a Woman works to legitimize the more openly hateful sequences that follow, so too have these pseudo-intellectual conversations about definitions of womanhood allowed more extreme transphobic formations to emerge into the mainstream. And perhaps those more recent developments provide a means of drawing this video to a close.
You know, it's not...
Well, the death of old Lizzie has been soaking up the majority of press attention over recent weeks. At time of recording, Britain's transphobic moral panic continues on in earnest. Shortly after I started working on this video, Boris Johnson resigned as Prime Minister of the UK. This meant that his colleagues in the Conservative Party had to elect a new leader. And as a direct result of seeing the anguish that the so-called trans debate appears to cause the Labour Party, candidates for the position jostled with one another to present themselves as the most opposed to trans rights. Announcing her bid for the party leadership, Suella Braverman gave this moving speech.
We need to get rid of all of this woke rubbish.
Oh, this woke rubbish, yes, that's it, yeah. All this stuff, you know? all of this rubbish and back to the country where...
Get back to a country where describing a man and a woman in terms of biology does not mean that you're going to lose your job.
Or if you are transgender, where, you know, maybe we want a society where if you are transgender, you won't lose your job for that reason. But clearly, it's against that, you know, because conservatism. No, that just seems to be just fascist.
Describing a man and a woman in terms of biology does not mean that you're going to lose your job.
Yeah, that's just
Rishi
fascist.
Sunak similarly launched his campaign.
Now, in fairness, he got worse later on. At the start, he was relatively okay. Then he just went right up the path. Like, wow, you really massive increase there, Rishi. You know, I had faith in you, but then, you know, I would never want him to win, but like I thought he'd be better than Liz, and I was like, towards the end, I was like, maybe not. He's going to become a lot more extreme.
Campaign with a manifesto for women's rights. In truth, little more than a transphobic dog whistle.
Yeah.
Another candidate, Penny Mordaunt, had previously been seen as a rare trans ally within the Conservative Party.
Trans men are men, trans women are women.
On putting herself forward for leader, however, she span like a fidget spinner, posting a Twitter thread about how trans women are not biological women and highlighting her record of fighting trans orthodoxy. Last, but by very no means least, we have...
It is very interesting how conservative politicians was like, oh yeah, no, my eyes were opened when I was a Remainer, yes, but now I'm a Brexiteer. It's like, okay, so you moved from having a relatively good idea to a shit one. Oh, you were trans ally and now you're transphobic. Okay, so you moved from a good idea to a shit one. Okay, are all the conservatives just moving to shit ideas? Like any other good ideas are just gonna go like, oh, the minimum wage. Oh no, Jacob has convinced us all that's a bad idea. So we're all removing that now. Yay!
We have Kemi Badenoch, who tried to grab headlines by banning gender-neutral toilets from the venue where she hosted her campaign launch. Wow. The problem being that the toilets in question were just 2 self-contained cubicles, so aides had to stick sad, handwritten notes reading men and ladies to the doors. Which I feel the need to say, if you're going to do gendered anything, it's clearly men and women or ladies and gentlemen. It's not men and ladies. If you're gonna swing around the gender binary like it's a flipping hammer, then at least get your labels right. I don't think it is an overstatement.
I mean, you know, technically, lady is a title, so whenever you write a lady, it's just like, no, you can't use that bathroom. You're not a lady. You need to be a lady to enter this bathroom, and you're not. No, you need to be given, you need to be like, is it married to a lord? I'm not sure what it is, but you know, like, what was it to be given the title of lady? Is it a lord? I'm not sure. I think it might be a lord. You know, it's like, only lord. You know, it's like, yeah, lady is, once again, a little bit of it's like a compliment, but also kind of not. It's like, you know, it's like this sort of weird, like, royal family shit. We're like, oh, you're like a king. It's like, oh, that's not a compliment. I don't want to be like an unelected dickhead, okay? So don't call me like a king, you know. You know, fucking Christ.
Statement at all. To say that this bout of competitive transphobia by potential prime ministers was provoked almost entirely by the sequence of interviews that we've looked at in this video. Whatever claims they might make about being apolitical, whatever defenses they might invoke about how they were just asking questions, these journalists' promotion of the idea that questioning the existence of trans people is a legitimate, even intelligent pursuit has very real consequences.
Sure.
It doesn't matter whether or not their intentions might be different from those of Matt Walsh, the results are surprisingly similar. But this pseudo-philosophical riddle me this genre of debate is not only dangerous as a gateway to more openly hostile transphobic
and
politics,
fascism.
It is troubling enough in and of itself. For it is inherently dehumanizing.
Yeah.
This whole charade about definitions of womanhood denies trans people their humanity.
True.
The hopes, fears, frustrations, and aspirations of actual living, breathing trans people are hidden from view, and this already marginalized community is instead transformed into a philosophical provocation, a linguistic complication. Such a mode of debate obviously makes it much easier for bigotry to grow.
True.
Because it conceals any traces of character and personality and experience that cis people watching these debates might connect with. All of this will no doubt be more than obvious to any trans people watching. Others will also likely have noticed the manner in which these debates mirror those surrounding other marginalized groups. For any cis people watching, however, I think whenever we find ourselves drawn into these kinds of discussions, it's important not only to make it clear that trans people and lives and rights are not up for debate, but also to re-inject that sense of humanity back into the conversation. Because that sense of shared humanity is the foundation on which real solidarity is built.
True.
Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that it has been worthy of your time.
You know.
If you think that others might get something out of these thoughts as well, then I would love it if you'd consider sharing the video on social media.
I guess, does this count as sharing? I'm gonna ask permission, but you know, like, yeah, doesn't. Anyway, but yeah, getting to the point. Yeah, you know, when it comes down to it, yeah, I think it is a massive issue when it comes to people who are transphobic, or you know, sometimes just not. Well, you know, sometimes just chasing the money. The problem is that if you think that it's gonna end here, if you're someone who supports that, not only are you wrong, it's not. If you're not, you know, a white, straight, cis man who's fairly rich, you're gonna be on the chopping block. You know, that's just a fact. So, you know, be aware, even if you are someone who supports transphobia, you're most likely going to be next. Anyway, yeah, so yeah, it is an important conversation to be had. And yes, please do go ahead, subscribe to I'm Nickolas, and of course, like the video. And thank you for watching, and hopefully you will come back next time, I guess. Anyway.